Dame Cicely Isabel Fairfield DBE, known as Rebecca West or Dame Rebecca West, was a British author, journalist, literary critic and travel writer. An author who wrote in many genres. West reviewed books for The Times, the New York Herald Tribune, the Sunday Telegraph, and the New Republic, and she was a correspondent for the Bookman. Her major works include Black Lamb and Grey Falcon, on the history and culture of Yugoslavia, A Train of Powder. Her coverage of the Nuremberg trials, published originally in the New Yorker, The Meaning of Treason, later The New Meaning of Treason, a study of the trial of the British Fascist William Joyce and others, The Return of the Soldier, a modernist World War I novel, and the Aubrey trilogy of autobiographical novels, The Fountain Overflows, This Real Night, and Cousin Rosamund.Time called her indisputably the world's #1 woman writer in 1947. She was made CBE in 1949, and DBE in 1959, in each case. The citation reads, writer and literary critic. Biography. Rebecca West was born Cicely Isabel Fairfield in 1892 in Kerry and grew up in a home full of intellectual stimulation, political debate, lively company, books and music. Her mother, Isabella, a Scotswoman, was an accomplished pianist but did not pursue a musical career after her marriage to Charles Fairfield. Charles, an Anglo-Irish journalist of considerable reputation but financial incompetence, deserted his family when Cicely was 8 years old. He never rejoined them and died impoverished and alone in a boarding house in Liverpool in 1906, when Cicely was 14. The rest of the family moved to Edinburgh, Scotland, where Cicely was educated at George Watson's Ladies' College. She had to leave school in 1907 due to a bout of tuberculosis. Cicely did not have any formal schooling after the age of 16, due to lack of funds. She had 2 older sisters. Letitia, who was the best educated of the 3, became one of the first fully qualified female doctors in Britain, as well as a barrister at the Inns of Court. Winifred, the middle sister, married Norman MacLeod, Principal Assistant Secretary in the Admiralty, and eventually Director General of Greenwich Hospital. Winnie's 2 children, Alison and Norman, became closely involved in Rebecca's life as she got older. Alison MacLeod would achieve a literary career of her own. West trained as an actress in London, taking the name Rebecca West from the rebellious young heroine in Rosamund by Henrik Ibsen. She and Letty became involved in the women's suffrage movement, participating in street protests. Meanwhile, West worked as a journalist for the feminist weekly Free Woman and the Clarion, drumming up support for the suffragette cause. In September 1912, West accused the famously libertine writer H.G. Wells of being the old maid among novelists in a provocative review in Free Woman of his novel Marriage. The review attracted Wells' interest and an invitation to lunch at his home. The 2 writers became lovers in late 1913. Their 10-year affair produced a son, Anthony West, born on 4 August 1914. The friendship lasted until Wells' death in 1946. West is also said to have had affairs with Charlie Chaplin and newspaper magnate Lord Beaverbrick. Early career. West established her reputation as a spokesperson for feminist and socialist causes and as a critic, turning out essays and reviews for the New Republic, New York Herald Tribune, New York American, New Statesman, The Daily Telegraph, and many more newspapers and magazines. George Bernard Shaw said in 1916 that Rebecca West could handle a pen as brilliantly as ever I could and much more savagely. During the 1920s, West began a lifelong habit of visits to the U. to give lectures, meet artists, and get involved in the political scene. There, she befriended CIA founder Allen Dulles, Charlie Chaplin, Harold Ross of The New Yorker, and historian Arthur Schlesinger, Jr., among many other significant figures of the day. Her lifelong fascination with the United States culminated in 1948 when President Truman presented her with the Women's Press Club Award for journalism, calling her the world's best reporter. In 1930, at the age of 37, she married a banker, Henry Maxwell Andrews, and they remained nominally together, despite one public affair just before his death in 1968. West's writing brought her considerable wealth, and by 1940 she owned a Rolls-Royce and a grand country estate, Ibstone House, in the Chiltern Hills of southern England. During World War II, West housed Yugoslav refugees in the spare rooms of her blacked-out manor, and she used the grounds as a small dairy farm and vegetable plot, agricultural pursuits that continued long after the war had ended. Later life. As West grew older, she turned to broader political and social issues, including humankind's propensity to inflict violent injustice on itself. Before and during World War II, West traveled widely, collecting material for books on travel and politics. In 1936–38, she made 3 trips to Yugoslavia, a country she came to love, seeing it as the nexus of European history since the late Middle Ages. Her non-fiction masterpiece, Black Lamb and Grey Falcon, is an amalgamation of her impressions for these trips. New York Times reviewer Catherine Woods wrote, in 2 almost incredibly full-packed volumes, one of the most gifted and searching of modern English novelists and critics has produced not only the magnification and intensification of the travel book form, but, one may say, its apotheosis. West was assigned by Ross Magazine to cover the Nuremberg trials for The New Yorker, an experience she memorialized in the book A Train of Powder. In 1950 she was elected a foreign honorary member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. She also went to South Africa in 1960 to report on apartheid in a series of articles for the Sunday Times. She traveled extensively well into old age. In 1966 and 1969, she undertook 2 long journeys to Mexico, becoming fascinated by the indigenous culture of the country and its mestizo population. She stayed with actor Romney Brent in Mexico City and with Catherine Wright, a longtime friend, in Cuernavaca. She collected a large number of travel impressions and wrote tens of thousands of words for a follow-up volume to Black Lamb and Grey Falcon, tentatively titled Survivors in Mexico. The work, however, was never finished, and only saw publication posthumously in 2003. Even into her late 70s, she visited Lebanon, Venice, Monte Carlo, and always went back to the United States. Old age. Her husband became both sleepy and inattentive as he got older. The sleepiness led to a car accident where no one was hurt, but Henry was charged with dangerous driving. He became obsessed by the Norwegian ballerina Gerd Larsen, and he would refuse to travel with West but wanted to return to London to be with Larsen. West initially considered this to be purely her husband's infatuation, but she came to think that Larsen was driven by money. At her husband's funeral she had the upsetting problem of Larsen's request to be amongst the mourners, even though she had only known him for 18 months. Henry's will left £5,000 for Larsen. After her husband's death in 1968, West discovered that her husband had been unfaithful with other women. She moved to London, where she bought a spacious apartment overlooking Hyde Park. Unfortunately, it was next door to the Iranian embassy. During the May 1980 incident, West, then 87, had to be evacuated. In the last 2 decades of her life, West kept up a very active social life, making friends with Martha Gellhorn, Doris Lessing, Bernard Levin, comedian Frankie Howard, and film star and director Warren Beatty, who filmed her for the movie Reds, a biography of journalist John Reed and his connection with the Russian Revolution. She also spent time with scholars such as Jane Marcus and Bonnie Keimscott, who began to chronicle her feminist career and varied work. She wrote at an unabated pace, penning masterful reviews for the Sunday Telegraph, publishing her last novel The Birds Fall Down, and overseeing the film version of the story by BBC in 1978. The last work published in her lifetime was 1900. 1900 explored the last year of Queen Victoria's long reign, which was a watershed in many cultural and political respects. At the same time, West worked on sequels to her autobiographically inspired novel The Fountain Overflows, although she had written the equivalent of 2 more novels. For the planned trilogy, she was never satisfied with the sequels and did not publish them. She also tinkered at great length with an autobiography, without coming to closure, and she started scores of stories without finishing them. Much of her work from the late phase of her life was published posthumously, including Family Memories, This Real Night, Cousin Rosamund, The Only Poet, and Survivors in Mexico. Unfinished works from her early period, notably Sunflower and The Sentinel, were also published after her death, so that her oeuvre was augmented by about 1/3 by posthumous publications. Relationship with her son. West's relationship with her son, Anthony West, was not a happy one. The rancor between them came to a head when Anthony, himself a gifted writer, his father's biographer, and a novelist, published Heritage, a fictionalized autobiography. West never forgave her son for depicting in Heritage the relationship between an illegitimate son and his 2 world-famous, unmarried parents, and for portraying the mother in unflattering terms. Essentially, she felt Anthony was airing in public his accusations against her as a bad mother, which stemmed partly from the fact that she had made a fiction of his provenance. She had asked him to call her auntie, and his father Wellesley, until he was about 4 or 5. He also felt she had made a habit of leaving him in institutions in his early years while she developed her career in the United States. West countered by claiming that she spent as much time with him as any child could reasonably hope to spend with a mother who was a professional. She was exasperated at his focus on her parenting, when he did not accuse his father of abandonment, even though Wells had been even more absent during Anthony's youth. Anthony, in fact, idolized Wells. The depiction of West's alter ego in Heritage as a deceitful, unloving actress and poor caregiver so wounded West that she broke off relations with her son and threatened to sue any publisher who would bring out Heritage in England. She successfully suppressed an English edition of the novel, which was only published there after her death, in 1984. Although there were temporary rapprochements between her and Anthony, a state of alienation persisted between them, causing West grief until her dying hour. She fretted about her son's absence from her deathbed, but when asked whether he should be sent for, answered, "Perhaps not, if he hates me so much." Death. West suffered from failing eyesight and high blood pressure in the late 1970s, and she became increasingly frail. Her last months were mostly spent in bed, sometimes delirious, sometimes lucid, and she complained that she was dying too slowly. She died on the 15th of March 1983 and is buried at Brookwood Cemetery, Woking. On hearing of her death, William Shawn, then editor-in-chief of The New Yorker, said, "Politics West grew up in a home filled with discussions of world affairs. Her father was a journalist who often involved himself in controversial issues. He brought home Russian revolutionaries and other political activists, and the debates helped to form West's sensibility, which took shape in novels such as The Birds Fall Down, set in pre-revolution Russia. But the crucial event that molded West's politics was the Dreyfus Affair. The impressionable Rebecca learned early on just how powerful was the will to persecute minorities and to subject individuals to unreasonable suspicion based on flimsy evidence and mass frenzy. West had a keen understanding of the psychology of politics, how movements and causes could sustain themselves on the profound need to believe or disbelieve in a core of values, even when that core contradicted reality. It would seem that her father's ironic, skeptical temper so penetrated her sensibility that she could not regard any body of ideas as other than a starting point for argument. Although she was a militant feminist and active suffragette, and published a perceptive and admiring profile of Emmeline Pankhurst, West also criticized the tactics of Pankhurst's daughter, Christabel, and the sometimes doctrinaire aspects of the Pankhurst's women's social and political union. The first major test of West's political outlook was the Bolshevik Revolution. Many on the left saw it as the beginning of a new, better world, and the end of the crimes of capitalism. West regarded herself as a member of the left, having attended Fabian socialist summer schools as a girl. But to West, both the revolution and the revolutionaries were suspect. Even before the Bolsheviks took power in October 1917, West expressed her doubts that events in Russia could serve as a model for socialists in Britain or anywhere else. West paid a heavy price for her cool reaction to the Russian Revolution. Her positions increasingly isolated her. When Emma Goldman visited Britain in 1924 after seeing Bolshevik violence firsthand, West was exasperated that British intellectuals ignored Goldman's testimony and her warning against Bolshevik tyranny. For all her censures of communism, however, West was hardly an uncritical supporter of the Western democracies. Thus in 1919-1920, she excoriated the U.S. government for deporting Goldman and for the infamous Palmer raids. She was also appalled at the failure of Western democracies to come to the aid of Republican Spain, and she gave money to the Republican cause. A staunch anti-fascist, West attacked both the conservative governments of her own country for appeasing Adolf Hitler and her colleagues on the left for their pacifism. Neither side, in her view, understood the evil Nazism posed. Unlike many on the left, she also distrusted Joseph Stalin. To West, Stalin had a criminal mentality that communism facilitated. She was outraged when the Allies switched the loyalties in regards to Yugoslav resistance movements by deciding in 1943 to start backing the communist-led partisans led by Tito in Yugoslavia, thus abandoning the support of Draza Mihailovic's Chetniks, whom she considered the legitimate Yugoslav resistance. She expressed her feelings and opinions on the Allies' switch in Yugoslavia by writing the satirical short story titled Madame Sarah's Magic Crystal, but decided not to publish it upon discussion with Orm Sargent, Foreign Office's Assistant Under Secretary of State. Writing in her diary, West mentions Sargent persuaded her that the recognition of Tito was made by reason of British military necessities, and for no other reason, and following Sargent's claim, she described her decision not to publish the story as an expression of personal willingness to sacrifice myself to the needs of my country. After the war, West's anti-communism hardened as she saw Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, and other Eastern and Central European states succumb to Soviet domination. It is not surprising in the context that West reacted to U.S. Senator Joseph McCarthy differently from her colleagues. They saw a demagogue terrorizing liberals and leftists with baseless accusations of communist conspiracy. West saw an oaf blundering into the minefield of communist subversion. For her, McCarthy was right to pursue communists with fervor, even if his methods were roughshod. Though her mild reaction to McCarthy provoked powerful revulsion among those on the left and dismay even among anti-communist liberals, she refused, however, to amend her views. Although West's anti-communism earned the high regard of conservatives, she never considered herself one of them. In post-war Britain, West voted Labour and welcomed the Labour landslide of 1945. But she spoke out against domination of the Labour Party by British trade unions, and thought left-wing politicians such as Michael Foot unimpressive. She had mixed feelings about the Callaghan government. West admired Margaret Thatcher, not for Thatcher's policies, but for Thatcher's achievement in rising to the top of a male-dominated sphere. She admired Thatcher's willingness to stand up to trade union bullying. In the end, West's anti-communism remained the centerpiece of her politics because she so consistently challenged the communists as legitimate foes of the status quo in capitalist countries. In West's view, communism, like fascism, was merely a form of authoritarianism. Communists were under party discipline and therefore could never speak for themselves, and West was a supreme example of an intellectual who spoke for herself, no matter how her comments might injure her. Indeed, few writers explicitly acknowledged how much West's embrace of unpopular positions hurt her on the left. A whole generation of writers abandoned West and refused to read her, as Doris Lessing suggested.